questions, and then we got a few extras. So there's 11 total. We'll go as long as we have time. We're allocating an hour and a half. So that's with our closing statements as well. So
Okay, we're recording, so. Okay. Welcome to the debate on Measure E. My name is Peter Schiffman. I'm with Lake County Magazine, and will be the moderator for the debate this evening. The debate on Measure E will be broadcast on Channel 8 and will also be available on Lake County Magazine website at lakecomagazine.com. The debate tonight is between Supervisor Anthony Farrington, who is in favor of the measure, and Mr. Phil Murphy, a resident of Lake County since 1984 and a walnut rancher, who has a different viewpoint on Measure E. Here are the ground rules for this evening. Each one of you will have 3 minutes to make an opening statement. After that, we'll be asking a series of questions. You will each have 2 minutes to answer your question. Then there'll be a 1-minute rebuttal for each of you. We would appreciate no interruptions when one person is individually speaking. If we have any repeated violation of that, I will disqualify the party from either responding to the other party's comments or for the following question. You'll have a 30-second notification when your time is left, then another 10-second, and upon completion of your time, you will be able to finish your sentence but may not continue after that. At the finish of the questions and responses, each of you will be allowed an additional 3 minutes for a closing statement. Any questions?
No.
All right. Measure E is a half-cent sales tax to implement water quality programs in Clear Lake and has been placed on the ballot by unanimous vote of the Lake County Board of Supervisors. If passed, it would impose a half-cent sales tax on transactions in the county. The sales tax money raised would be used to fund nuisance weed and algae abatement programs and strengthen efforts to prevent infestation of quagga and zebra mussels from infesting Clear Lake. It would also fund water quality programs to comply with state and federal regulatory conditions to protect and improve Clear Lake's water quality. Sales tax money raised through Measure E would only be spent on the lake. Revenues cannot be diverted for any other purposes. In addition to an annual independent audit, the establishment of a Citizens Oversight Committee will ensure transparency. Measure E will sunset in 10 years. Okay, the first question, this is for Supervisor Farrington. Excessive algae growth and poor water quality of Clear Lake has had a negative impact on the tourism industry. What programs will be funded by Measure E to remedy these problems? What do you believe will be the impact on the tourism, and how long will this impact take to take hold?
Peter, may I ask you if we're going to have opening statements?
I apologize. You're right, opening statement. I apologize. You're absolutely right.
I didn't want to interrupt you because I didn't want you to disqualify me, so I waited for you to
You're
ask the
interrupted. You're
question.
gone. No, I apologize. Let's start off with the opening statement. I apologize.
Okay, who has the first opening statement?
You do, sir.
3 minutes? Okay, thank you. I would like to begin by thanking Peter and Terry and the audience that's here and Phil for giving a different perspective on Measure E. I'd also like to thank PEG Channel in advance. I understand that we are recording this and they'll be replaying this debater forum, if you will, on Measure E and allowing the public to be informed as they approach in terms of the November 6th election. I'll tell you that after going through a recent election this last June 2012, I spent about 6-7 months with my family and closest friends about deliberating whether I would run again as a county supervisor. After years of being in the political world and being a candidate and elected official, at times you can become cynical and jaded and sometimes impatient about the progress of government. But my passion for the lake is really what kept me in the game, that wanted me to put my name on the ballot so the voters could have an option and give me consideration and the honor of serving them again. One of the things before our retired CAO, Kelly Cox, left his position, as he stated to me that there's no money for the lake. We've set aside one-time monies. We've used small amount of monies over the years from our transient occupancy taxes. to help pay for our efforts to go after nuisance weeds and algae, but there were very small nominal amounts. So with that statement and taking in what he had conveyed to me, I made a commitment to run again to try to find an ongoing stream of revenue to finally address the nuisances that are continuing to cripple our economy. Measure E, as you indicated, is a 10-year sunset clause. It comes on the rear of the state rolling back a 1% sales tax statewide, where we're now one of the lowest base sales tax rates in the unincorporated area in the state of California as well at 7.25%. The two cities at 7.75%. Our neighbors such as Sonoma County is at 8%. As you indicated, it is a specific tax, and our board purposely made it a specific tax so it would be locked in to only lake-related programs and could not be used for other government programs or administration instead of utilizing a general tax approach, which would only require a 50 plus 1% vote. Specific tax requires 2/3, 66%, and that is how our board wanted to present it to the voters. This is not a mandate, this is a choice, and I want to make it clear that just because I'm the voice and I'm passionate about the lake, and I never thought I would get behind a sales tax. This is my passion. This is the dream that I have in terms of Lisa letting our electorate who has found the lake decline over the years and to give them a choice to decide the fate of Clear Lake and our community.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Murphy?
When voters are deciding on a sales tax or any tax measure like this one, there are
I need you to flip your mic on.
Okay, is that better?
Perfect.
Great. All right. When voters decide on tax measures such as this one, there are three basic questions they should be asking themselves. The first one is, have all the reasonable alternatives been explored and eliminated? The second one is, will this tax burden be fairly shared? And the third one is, will the money be spent intelligently with good oversight? On all three of these fundamental elements, Measure E falls short and does so very badly. To start with, we have another way to fund at least the quagga program and perhaps the algae program as well, and that's by restructuring vector control and taking the $1 million a year that's wasted there and applying it to the quagga and perhaps the algae program. Then, as far as this being a fairly shared tax, we're looking at the people that benefit most from the lake's water, Yolo County agriculture, has so far paid nothing, and if we pass this measure, they will have absolutely no reason to contribute to us to help with the quagga because we will have already agreed to do that job for them. So it's not being evenly shared. And then on the third part, the Oversight Committee is comprised of 6 elected officials and 3 citizens. And in spite of that disparity there, it's being called a Citizens Committee, which clearly it is not. It's hard to imagine what kind of oversight you would get when 2 of the people on the committee will actually be people that are overseeing themselves. So that is no legitimate form of oversight there. Then it comes to how will the money be spent? Well, the track record of the county on the quagga program in particular has been really atrocious from the beginning. It's been a series of error after error. They started out by putting someone in charge who thought the quagga was already in the lake. She has been replaced, but her replacement, who is running the Water Resources Department, is just as flawed. They are not capable of doing the job. Then we spent $50,000 on a consultant who basically came up with nothing but a very flawed test to get a quagga sticker that was quickly abandoned. We spent $21,000 on a study to give us basically useless information on whether the quagga would either do very well or just reasonably well in the lake. That's not helpful information. We can't just be spending money and not have a focus and a direction to it. But the list goes on and on. We went out and bought 4 decontamination stations, and they sat for years before we had to sell 2 of them at a loss. So,
Good, thank you very much. Okay, on to the first question for Mr. Farrington.
Okay.
Excessive algae growth and poor water quality of Clear Lake has had a negative impact on the tourism industry. What programs will be funded by Measure E to remedy these problems? What do you believe will be the impact on tourism, and how long will it take to feel the impact?
Well, if Measure E passes, it's projected that $2.4 million will be available for the efforts to address the delineated areas or allocations that you have referenced. 88% of that money would go to weeds, algae, mussels prevention, 9% to water quality, 2% project and matching funds, and 1% for an annual independent audit. The expenditure plan that will be developed by the Citizens Oversight, which is also functions as a policy committee. It's not just a Citizens Oversight to make sure that the monies are spent accordingly to our umbrella expenditure plan. They also have a role proportionally to represent the City of Lakeport, Clear Lake, and the county at large, the 9 members, to also make recommendations for policy. They will look at developing a plan and how much of those monies out of 88% of the $2.4 million will go to algae, how much will go to weeds, and how much will go towards the prevention of the infestation of zebra and quagga mussels. With an ongoing revenue stream, which we've never had, we've only used one-time monies for algae abatement, we would be able to contract out with a private sector vendor to either design and fabricate equipment that which necessitates what we need to do to abate the nuisance, which is that of capturing the matting, dewatering it, and transferring it to shore. Right now, in our use of one-time monies, we were not able to invest in that type of equipment because we don't have the ongoing revenue stream. So we've had these hit and misses with a vendor that's taken existing equipment, tried to retool it to meet our needs. And what's important, and what I think is one of the most important aspects about the Measure E, is it provides an ongoing revenue stream, which we've never had before. It allows us to take that money and invest it and contract with vendors that will develop the technology that is already in place to dewater the matting, capture it, and transport it to shore. And immediately once we begin those cosmetic nuisance abatements, we'll realize a benefit.
Mr. Murphy, why do you think the money raised by Measure E will not help the lake to control the algae and water quality?
Actually, I've never made any statements to that effect. I do believe that we have to have a robust program to protect us from the quagga mussel. I also believe that we're going to have to spend a significant amount of money every year to clear pathways through weeds. And what we do for the algae is, I think, probably an open question right now. I think it needs some more study and analysis before we really start committing any more money to it, because so far what we've done has been relatively ineffective. And some of the projects, or the project that could really make a big difference, the Middle Creek Restoration Project, has to get some new focus, because it has been kind of neglected for some time now.
Do I get a rebuttal to that?
Yes, you do, sir.
Okay.
1 minute.
The time is flying fast on a very complex issue here, I tell you. The things that we were able to accomplish with setting aside one-time monies the last 2 years, which was the first time in the history that the County of Lake has ever set aside those one-time monies, we were able to be successful in aquatic weed abatement, close to 250 acres, boat lanes, ingress and egress from the shoreline, close to the 250 acres in predominantly areas where the matting is most prolific. With algae abatement, one of the things that we did realize with our efforts was we were able to ascertain what works and does not work, whether it be algicide approach, aeration, solar bees, skimming, using pumper trucks, a water pusher, or as I indicated this last year, we retooled a mechanical weed harvester to capture the matting, dewater it, and transport it to the shore. This equipment does not have the economies of scales, and with Measure E and the ongoing revenue stream, we'll be able to actually put that equipment, implement those practices, and actually have success in abating those nuisances.
Mr. Murphy, 1 minute rebuttal.
I think people should be aware of the fact that this last year, $150,000 was taken out of the algae program and redirected to the weed program because according to our Public Works Director, Scott DeLeon, basically what the county was doing was ineffective, and in some cases he said it was counterproductive. So as Tony has pointed out, we are learning the hard way by doing things wrong generally, and we still don't really have a clear idea of how to get algae out of the lake. I think that other than in a few limited areas like bays and harbors, there's really not much you can do about it once it's in the lake. It's a matter of scale and logistics, and the cost would be just phenomenal to do it on a larger scale.
Before we go on to the next question, I'd like to make everyone aware that the questions that we're asking tonight were provided to us by the general public through our Facebook of Lake County Magazine and also through our website, and also I believe through emails. So this is not our questions, it is from the general public here. Okay, second question, Mr. Murphy. If Lake County voters approve Measure E, the biggest winner may be Yolo County, who depends on our water. Residents will be taxing themselves to fund a major cost of the quagga mussel prevention program for the next decade. Do you agree or disagree with this statement, and why? Do you think there is a way to bring Yolo County into this debate?
I think there is a way to bring Yolo County into this, but it certainly isn't by passing Measure E, because if we do, we've got absolutely no leverage to use against them. They have a tremendous amount to lose economically compared to us. They have a lot more at stake. If they get the quagga into their water system, they'll be spending a lot more than we will to deal with the consequences of that. So if we do pass this, they'll have no reason to contribute whatsoever. And I know that the county has made efforts to get them to contribute, but they have not been successful so far. I believe that's because they have not presented them with a detailed plan that really addresses Yolo County's needs. So yeah, I very much resent being a Lake County grower who's being asked to tax himself in order to pay to protect the water source for the people I compete with downstream in Yolo County. That really annoys me.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Peter, before I jump into that, Phil is correct that we as a board elected to move some monies from the algae abatement efforts towards the lake weeds because we were realizing that the vendor that we had contracted with was not being successful. That trial and error, and hopefully I'll get a little more time to go into detail, we'll be able to flesh out what will work. And so it makes no sense to spin our wheels and continue to spend taxpayers' monies if that's not being effective when we know that it's tested with herbicide and mechanical harvesting to go after the weeds. Yolo is a downstream benefactor. They are the senior water rights owners and holders of pre-1914, which is senior in the state of California on appropriative rights. They reap the benefits. We presented to them over a period, what I call a honeymoon period of 3 to 4 years in our ad hoc committee, where we had 2 board members, starting with Ed Roby and Supervisor Brown and myself, and there are 2 board members on staff, where we talked about mutual support, where we entered into a memorandum of understanding, where we affected the wild and scenic legislation to protect off-stream storage and holding ponds above the Clear Lake Dam, and very successful in doing so. We also presented to them the amount of money that either directly or indirectly benefits them, close to $100 million, where their counter argument was, well, we pay property taxes, which, if my memory serves me correct, is somewhere around $28,000 a year, which is negligible at best. There is no legal mechanism to make Yolo come to the table and to pay and have a cost-sharing endeavor with setting up inspection stations, if that's the program, or controlling launch ramps for the zebra quagga mussels. There is no statutory authority, there's no precedence. It's them showing leadership, which they have not done as of to date. In terms of subsidizing ag, I understand where Mr. Murphy's coming from, but you know, the lake is something that if Measure E passes, everybody's going to benefit from, and it includes ag interest here, because if we are infested with zebra quagga mussels, the Dresinids and the zebra quagga mussels will be able to work their way upstream. There's many farmers that draw from the creek, and their intakes would be fouled. And that's a classic example where it's $35 million that they're realizing because of the fouling from those mussels.
Thank you. 1 minute rebuttal.
Actually, there's relatively few growers that draft from either the lake directly or the creek, so I'm not sure that the impact will be quite that dramatic on local growers. But I don't argue the point that we really need to keep the quagga out of the lake, and we have to, there's no inexpensive, simple way to do it. It's going to be a long-term, expensive proposition. So on that point, I think Mr. Farrington and I would agree that there has to be a way to fund this. I think our main difference tonight is who pays it and how that money is spent.
I get to respond to that as well?
You may respond.
Well, I know a number of growers just right next door to me, the old Romier property in Kelsey Creek and Mostyn's, for example, that take both groundwater and water from Kelsey Creek. I know a number of growers in Scotts Valley and Scotts Creek as well, and the infestation would work its way into the upper watershed, which would be not only economic hardship and ecological hardship for the county of Lake, but it would have a number of other deleterious impacts, such as the air quality with the mussels decomposing as well. You know, I'd love to put the burden and the onus on YOLO. I'd love to say that the state and the federal governments are going to provide us the funding, but the reality is it's not going to happen. And I also hope that I get an opportunity to address the vector control issue, because even though there is statutory authority that would allow our board to go through the process to dissolve them, which would require us to go through the LAFCO process, in the event that there is no protest, and which was not trigger an election, we could go through that process. But even if we went through that arduous process, they would fight us tooth and nail. And even if we were successful, there is no statutory authority that shows that the mussels are a vector, nor is algae.
Okay. Next question, Mr. Farrington, you may answer first. The purpose of the Oversight Committee is to review the annual independent audit, make sure that Measure E money is spent properly, and recommend a detailed plan as to how this money should be spent. It would also ensure that said expenditures are proportional in the interest of the county and the cities of Clear Lake and Lakeport. As approximately 66% of the committee is elected officials from those stakeholder communities, do you think this committee will be unbiased, effective, and why or why not? Is there a way to expand the citizen portion of this committee?
Well, the first answer to your question is yes, I do believe it will be effective. In terms of expanding or changing it, no. If Measure E passes, it's set in stone. The composition is, as Phil indicated, it's 6 elected officials and 6 residents. When I first presented the Citizens Oversight Committee, it was equal and proportional in that regard. It was 3 elected and 3 citizens. The City Council, Clear Lake, pushed for more elected officials, as did the City of Lakeport. One of the things that we were able to create, and you know, this is the thing that's unique about Measure E, it had unanimous support from all 3 jurisdictions, which I've never witnessed before in my years of service, where all 3 of the county, the 2 cities, were unanimous in putting the Measure E before the voters. The odd numbers required, so there's no stalemates in decision making. You're right that the first charge is to work with the auditor, Kathy Saderlin, to make sure the monies that are collected are spent within those allocations that we talked about, and to also require an independent annual audit by a third-party auditor and review that to make certain that there's transparency and that it's accurate, but that also that these members are going to be policy. The elected officials and the citizens will serve as a policy committee in terms of designing a specific detailed expenditure plan, and it was designed so it's proportional, so that the City of Lakeport has 3 representatives, the county incorporated area has 3 representatives, and the Clear Lake, City of Clear Lake has 3 representatives, and it's proportional so that there is not one jurisdiction that has a greater number than the other, so they have equal pull and say in terms of the recommendation as an oversight committee to our board and the lead agency of the County of Lake.
Mr. Murphy?
Okay, first off, I think Tony misspoke when he said there was going to be 6 citizens on this committee, because that's incorrect.
6 electeds, 3 citizens.
Okay, well, then
You did say 6
misspeak
and
on
6,
that.
but in error.
Anyway, just to make it clear to everyone, there is a minority of citizens on what is being called and used as an advertising and selling point for this measure, a citizens oversight committee. Now, I believe this is the reason people are getting cynical about government, because when the government comes along and tells you that the citizens are going to play a key role in this, and yet they are in a minority on a committee that has absolutely no authority whatsoever, it's nothing short of a deception. It's a bait and switch. They're not being honest with people. This is not a citizens oversight committee. It's not even really an oversight committee, because it can't really perform that function if it has no authority. And while Mr. Farrington is saying that they are going to develop policy, I have a feeling that the policy is really going to be developed either in Water Resources or Public Works Department and by the Board of Supervisors. And that's what's going to be overseen. Because why would the Oversight Committee be overseeing its own policy that it was writing? That doesn't make sense.
Well, let me say that if I misspoke about the elected, I apologize. It wasn't intentional. I don't want to feed any conspiracy theories here. The reality is these meetings are open to the public. They're going to comply with the Brown Act. Citizens at large will be having input, and in fact will be welcome to provide input to this oversight committee. And these elected officials, just because you're elected does not mean that you lose your citizen status in the community. And I do take some offense that just because you're elected that you're corrupt or you're not going to do the right thing. I trust the County of Lake in passing balanced budgets. You've seen a tremendous success of us bringing a college here and a number of projects that we've brought to fruition. You suggest that we should take over vector control, and I would ask Mr. Murphy, why would you want us to take over vector control if you didn't trust the County of Lake as a lead agency? So that begs that question. As I indicated, this committee is not designed to have a legislative authority. It is to make policy recommendations, and it's going to make certain that the auditor controller is looking at the monies, making sure that they are allocated appropriately, and review the independent audit. Those policy recommendations will come and ultimately be decided by our board, the elected officials, not by staff and DWR, and I think it's important to underline that.
Mr. Murphy?
Well, I think that if people really felt that this committee had some legitimacy, organizations like the Clear Lake Chamber of Commerce would be supporting Measure E, and they aren't.
Yes, they are. They just endorsed it this week. You
That,
got Alvaro right here. Clear Lake
okay,
Chamber of Commerce is behind.
that must be new information,
Well,
because it's not on their website.
It's on our ads, and it's on our
Anyway,
website.
the story keeps going back and forth here. Either this is an oversight committee to review policy that's been developed by the Board of Supervisors or Public Works or Water Resources, or it's making its own policy, which begs the question, who's overseeing that? But either way, again, this oversight committee has no authority. And when you've got 2 people on there from the Board of Supervisors who are in the position of supposedly overseeing themselves, it defies logic how that can have any legitimacy.
Thank you. Next question, this is for you, Mr. Murphy. Recent state legislation signed by Governor Brown provides funding for Lake County to prevent quagga mussel infestation. Why do we need or don't need Measure E to provide funding for that part of the program?
Well, I think it's a little unclear as to how much money the state is going to be providing us, and it's a little unclear of what kind of time frame we'll be seeing that in, how soon and for how long. Things being as shaky as they are financially at the state level, I wouldn't count on that for doing the whole job. That's why I think that we have to look at government within Lake County and find out how we can restructure it to improve its efficiency and stop the waste that's going on, in particular in the agency of vector control, which should be doing this job to start with. And I know what's going on there because I was a board of directors member for 2 years. I understand that agency very well, and I can tell you right now $1 million a year is being wasted at that agency, in part because it's a special district and it doesn't have proper oversight. I think if it was being run by the county, I think it would have adequate oversight and it could be restructured in a way that would save us over $1 million a year, forever.
Thank you.
Well, we're referring to AB 2443, which was authored by Das Williams out of Santa Barbara. It was signed by the governor. Unfortunately, this legislation, it doubles vessel registration fees statewide, doubling them from $20 to $40. It does not kick in effect, actually, and will not be implemented where counties or jurisdictions will see the monies, and we'll reiterate there to go to local jurisdictions until 2013. It's only estimated that statewide that these monies will be about $5 million to $5.1 million, just a little over half of what Measure E would provide to our own community. To say that these dollars would be helpful to us in a grant basis each year. Number one, they're not ongoing monies. It's a grant process through DWR and the state that you would have to apply for annually. And if you were successful, you're in a competitive posturing with other 57 jurisdictions or counties throughout the state. There is no way that $5 million is going to spread out across the 58 counties and where we're going to be able to implement a very comprehensive zebra quagga mussel program. The reality of vector control, I've read the budget, and as I indicated, there's statutory authority for the County of Lake to take over those activities, but I still have not seen any statutory provisions where algae and mussels are considered a vector. I've also looked at the United States Health, Department of Health and Services and the Center of Disease and Prevention, and do not consider algae or mussels as vectors. So even if we're able to go through that gauntlet, we would not be able to utilize those monies to go after algae or the mussels. Money may be squandered, but that's not in my purview. I will tell you that the biggest vector when it comes to zebra quagga mussels is the boats themselves, the watercraft that come from out of counties, from other areas, from infested areas. Just in San Benito, for example, San Justo is a reservoir that's been infested with zebra mussels. It is quarantined and shut down, and that is an imminent threat that we face as a community. Our board has even talked about shutting down Clear Lake to reduce the risk of infestation. That is how dire and what a critical juncture that we are in right now with Measure E.
Thank you. Rebuttal time, 1 minute.
First of all, there's absolutely no question that from a legal and technical standpoint that the quagga mussel meets the definition of a vector because it can cause injury and or discomfort to human beings. And that's the only criteria really that you need to meet to qualify as a vector. If you look around the state at the various vector control agencies, they cover a wide variety of animals, everything from honeybees to skunks, depending upon which agency you're talking about. So the state really gives you a lot of latitude on that as far as how that money has to be spent that's distributed to all these different vector control agencies. And I think the state's main concern is that we not ask them for more. They're not really terribly concerned, obviously, with how we're spending what we're getting so far. I'm telling you right now that $1 million a year is being wasted in that tiny agency, and it's an obscene level of waste that should be addressed regardless of what Measure E does.
I wholeheartedly disagree. There is no statutory authority that professes that algae and the dreadnoughts or the zebra quagga mussels are vectors. Injury and discomfort as being the criteria. I'm not aware of that. Usually we're talking health and safety issues. We're talking about vectors such as mosquitoes that will present encephalitis and infection to individuals, dengue fever. We're talking powassan, which is provided by ticks. We're talking about the hantavirus, which is a pulmonary type infection that is carried by rodents. The algae and the mussels that provide discomfort don't even reach the magnitude. They don't provide even a threat of death to humans. So I don't see where Mr. Murphy believes that the litmus test has been met to qualify them as vectors. The boats are the vectors. That's the reality. If money's being squandered with vector control, Mr. Murphy, I advocated, I fought for you even when you were removed from the oversight or the board for the Vector Control District to serve as a watchdog, and I stood by you. But that's something that needs to be addressed in a different fashion, and it's not going to be enough money to address our problems that we're confronted with countywide.
Well, before we get on to the next question, somehow we've gotten into vector control,
Yes.
which was not the intent of the question that was submitted. So I'm going to ask you just to say yes or no is, do you believe that the bill that just got signed by Governor Brown is sufficient to take care of the quagga mussel problem in Lake County?
No, as I indicated, $5 million statewide is not even close to being adequate, and it's a grant process.
Mr. Murphy?
No, I agree with Mr. Farrington. It's a drop in the bucket.
Thank you very much. Okay. Come on to the next question here. For you, Mr. Farrington.
Okay.
What can be done to prevent future cyanobacteria infestations in Clear Lake? What methods are available now, and how can Measure E help?
Well, to address, our history of our lake is we've always had blue-green algae, but it has changed and evolved, in particular over the last couple of years. I've been blessed to have stories handed down to me over the last 150 years of my pioneer family that came to Lake County, and me being born here, me living on the lake and seeing the lake evolve to where in the last few years we've experienced the Limbia, where we have a crusty, dense matting that emits a very noxious sewer odor that is crippling our economy. Measure E will provide short-term solutions and long-term. Short-term solutions in regards to 88% of the monies of Measure E can be allocated towards abating those nuisances, where I've talked about where we actually have to either use vessels, which I call water dozers, which is a simple approach where we can push with very fine mesh the dense matting to either shore or to a pump station and dewater and get it out of the lake, or design and fabricate a harvester that actually has the economies of scale to address the matting, to get that out of the lake so it does not fuel subsequent nutrient loading or growth cycles for the next year. Those are the short-term fixes. The long-term goes back to Middle Creek Restoration Marsh Project, which we have made a priority every single year that I can recall being on the board. That project was conceived back in '94 when a feasibility study was done with the Clean Lakes program, and then a reconnaissance study in '97. And then moving forward, since I've been elected, we've passed and actually completed the EIR, Environmental Impact Report, the Environmental Impact Statement for NEPA, and comply with state and federal environmental regulations. And since '03 and moving forward, we have secured close to $12 million. Unfortunately, as Phil talked about, he indicated we've lost our focus. We've never lost our focus, but money has been frozen. We had no access with money once the monies, the bubble in the economy and the state withheld our monies. Now we have $7 million that we're releasing, and just 2 weeks ago we acquired 4 more properties. We have acquired 7 and 11, and we're planning up to 6 or 7 this next year.
Mr. Murphy, how would you prevent?
Excuse me, do I get a rebuttal to that?
You can rebuttal afterwards. Is that all right?
Sure.
Thank you.
Unless you want to only get your 1 minute instead of 2.
How would you prevent cyanobacteria infestations without the Measure E funds?
Boy, that's with them or without them. I think that is a very difficult technical challenge. I don't think it can be done with 100% assurance, regardless of what level of funding you have. But again, I don't think the issue here really is so much whether or not we should, raise money to deal with lake problems. It's how we should raise that money and how exactly we should spend it. I think that's where the real concern should be of the taxpayers and voters, because I think that we've seen a rather poor record on the part of the county so far on lake issues, whether you're talking about algae or the quagga mussel. I think the only part of the program that's been reasonably successful and cost efficient has been the weed control program.
1 minute rebuttal?
Well, you bet. The Middle Creek Restoration Project, about 70% of the nutrient loading, in particular phosphorus, comes in through the confluence of Scotts Creek and Middle Creek. That makes up to greater than 50% of the inflow that comes into the lake. The long-term plan, 20 to 30 years as scheduled, will help restore 2,000 acres of wetlands. It'll help capture that sediment and reduce the phosphorus loading and the nutrient loading and the nitrogen loading that takes place. That is the long-term measure. He provides monies up to 11%, both the 2% for capital match, 9% for water quality, anywhere from $280,000, $300,000 a year that can go towards property acquisition or grant matching opportunities. That would be anywhere close to $4 million over 10 years. How to raise the money, we had a committee that was created by our board, comprised of George Speak, Kathy Fowler, Jim Fetzer, Peggy King, and Melissa Fulton. We looked at a number of options in terms of securing revenue. And the reason the county has struggled is because we have not had that ongoing revenue. We've had one-time monies. We have a balanced budget with limited reserves. With the recommendation of ongoing revenue, we looked at assessments on parcels. We looked at TOT taxes and sales taxes. And sales tax seemed to be a cost-sharing approach where visitors and tourists would share that cost besides residents.
Thank you. Rebuttal?
Okay, number one, I think people should be aware of the fact that the Weed and Algae Steering Committee that was just mentioned by Mr. Farrington was supposedly going to accomplish this job using existing funding. That was their stated goal. They did not meet that goal. They instead just said, well, boy, this looks like it's too much money. We better go put a tax measure before the voters. So they failed in their stated initial goal right there. Another thing that people need to remember is that in the last 3 weeks, we've seen 3 dramatically different expenditure plans for Measure E. The taxpayers today, and the Board of Supervisors for that matter, have no idea what this program is really going to look like. So when Mr. Farrington says, you know, we're going to be making significant contributions to the Middle Creek Restoration Project, that may or may not be the case.
May I respond to that?
That's not the format, Mr. Murphy.
I can get it next question. I can get it next question. That's fine. If there was a misstatement that I need to address, I'll do it on my own another time then. Thank you.
We do like playing by the rules.
No, I understand.
Okay.
Things are just moving so quickly on a very complex issue.
It is a
with
very
1 minute.
complex
Yeah.
issue.
Yes.
And that's why we appreciate putting this on. Okay, Mr. Farrington, sir. Recently, the director of Lake County Health Department has made recommendations that anyone swimming in the lake should not swallow the water or inhale aerosol due to the cyanobacteria toxins. In your opinion, how likely is it that someone could become ill or die from direct contact with cyanobacteria, cyanotoxins in the lake? Who should be held responsible if that happens? Will any of the Measure E money be spent in health-related areas to mitigate this?
No, I'm going to answer this briefly. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a biologist. I know that I've heard that we've had anywhere from excess of 30 different types of algae up to 100 different types of species of algae. I understand that cyanobacteria is a toxic algae. I think it's unsafe to drink any type of water that is not treated, either chlorinated or going through reverse osmosis or some type of treatment, whether it be in the upper watershed or in the lake. So I would highly recommend that nobody drink lake water. I think it goes without saying. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that question. The liability relies in terms of who is borne the liability. I have no idea. The state could be liable. The county could be liable to whoever you want to sue on that day for being dumb enough to drink lake water. In terms of Mr. Murphy saying that the charge of the ad hoc committee was just to look at reallocation of resources within our existing budget, that's not true. Here's a summary of funding sources right out of the report that was dated in 2010, the exact date 16/2010. They look at property tax options, sales tax, water consumption fee, TOT, business taxes, benefit assessment zones at a larger scale, boat registration fees, boat launch fees, expanded sticker program costs, and reallocation of existing county resources, and a financial contribution from the tribe. So they looked at the pros and cons. They looked at every aspect. It was not merely looking at reallocating resources within our county budget. What this catalyst was behind the formation of this committee, it was a perfect storm. That year, the Disney's water sports and our board had an agendized item where they took us on the lake. All the board members, because not every board member, believe it or not, uses the lake, was able to go out firsthand and see the matting, to see the algae, to hear from Disney family in terms of what their experiences from tourism, how it's affected the economy, how engines are blowing up, wave runners, boats, and from that same confluence of events, the Lyngbia reared its head and created the perfect storm, which really caught our attention. So with the committee, the dense matting that's continued to increase, and the Lyngbia, we decided to set aside one-time money and finally make an investment in our lifeblood, which is Clear Lake.
Mr. Murphy, back to the health issues which we asked the question about. What kind of policies should be in place regarding the health issues of the lake itself?
You mean in regards to the algae toxicity? Or?
Well, the cyanobacteria toxins.
Well, I would have to agree with Mr. Farrington. It's a bad idea to drink lake water. That would be unhealthy whether there was toxic cyanobacteria in it or not. I think that goes without saying. I don't know, because I don't have any medical background, if that's a very large threat, or if it's a growing threat, or just how to place it on the scale. I would like to say that as far as that steering committee goes, if you will refer back to the Board of Supervisors of September 8th, 2010, where this committee was formed, its stated goal was to use existing funding. Now, what Mr. Farrington has referred to is things that were done after the committee was formed, because I guess it occurred to him pretty quickly that going the existing funding route was going to be a pretty rough road. Well, you know, again, they had a good intention when they started out, but they went off track and they failed in their goal that was stated at the inception of that committee, not at the completion of it. And it's, as far as I know, disappeared off the face of the earth now.
The primary purpose was to look at, within existing county funds, how we could utilize those or maximize those dollars to make a difference in the lake. The other purpose, it was multi-pronged, was to look at other revenue sources, because they realized, the committee within their investigation process, that we needed ongoing revenue. We didn't have that stream of revenue. The genesis behind Measure E is not this committee. I assure you. The genesis behind Measure E is our Board of Supervisors and the City Council, the City of Clear Lake, and the City of Lakeport that supported unanimously putting Measure E before the voters. So Measure E wasn't even conceived back in 2010. You know, algae blooms is a worldwide problem, and we've seen videos going viral in terms of even the reflecting pool in DC where algae blooms are taking place, and how do we deal with it? There's different theories in terms of nutrient, phosphorus loading, climate change, global climate change. What we're looking at is, we're not looking at making Clear Lake a swimming pool. We're not looking at making Clear Lake a Lake Tahoe. We're looking at mitigating the nuisances in those areas where they accumulate, whether it be Soda Bay, Manatee Cove, Austin Park, and also providing funding for long-term solutions.
Perfect.
Well, again, I think that the steering committee is another example of the dysfunction we've seen in county government from the beginning of the quagga and the algae programs. The steering committee was really created because the Clear Lake Advisory Committee was unable to do its primary job. It was basically an alternative committee to the Clear Lake Advisory Committee. And the way I see it is that we have a number of structural problems in county government that have to be addressed before we can move forward on any of these problems. And so far, that has not been the approach the Board of Supervisors has taken. They have to decide either to restructure and reform the Clear Lake Advisory Committee or disband it. Because as it is now, it's ineffective and dysfunctional.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, I'm going to rephrase the original question, allow you each 1 minute to respond. Because I understand the context of the question, even though it may have not been provided to you in an appropriate manner, because none of us are medical doctors, and we all understand that. So let's cut to the chase. Does the lake currently, in your opinion, present a health issue or a health problem to not just the residents, but also people coming in through tourism? And if so, is there any funding available through Measure E to counteract that problem? Mr. Farrington.
Well, I think if you're going to drink lake water, any water body throughout the state of California, the nation, for that matter, the world, you're going to expose yourself to a risk of health hazard. I understand that cyanobacteria and exposing yourself to skin, and there's potential for rashes to occur as well. So there is that risk. I understand that some animals, such as dogs, have reacted. I also know that air quality is an issue, and I have constituents, and I also know those in the Supervisor Rushing's district and the Keys in particular that are increasing their incidence of going to the doctor because they're dealing with respiratory issues because of the air quality and the impact that it has on them breathing on a daily basis, the lyngbia and the matting that is accumulated in that area. This measure will not be a silver bullet and cure it. Will it help mitigate it and address some of those areas where we can go in and clean out possibly those channels or those coves where it accumulates? The answer to that question is yes. And I also agree with Mr. Murphy that CLAC is not functioning, and that's one of the reasons why I brought this Aquatic Weed and Algae Steering Committee item to our board. I was actually the author of that memo to bring that item to the board for our consideration.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Murphy.
All right. Unfortunately, I think that Mr. Farrington has gotten into a habit over recent weeks of making statements that are unequivocal about what Measure E will do, when, as I have just pointed out, there are 3 vastly different expenditure plans that have been put out there so far, just in the last 3 weeks, and none of these have been reviewed or approved. So I think that Mr. Farrington has to qualify his statements by, I believe money should be spent in this way, or I believe we could do this, but that would only represent his own opinion because he's just one vote on the board out of 5 people who will decide what actually does take place. And, you know, as I've just pointed out, no one really knows what we're getting in Measure E, other than they're going to take $24 million and they'll spend $24 million. That we're sure of.
Thank you. This is a good lead into the next question, and we've been bantering about this all evening.
Hopefully it's not vector control.
No, sir.
All right, we're lucky.
Darn.
Yeah, I know that's
I think we've
one of his
talked about
pet projects.
That's all right. Okay. I'm going to read the question as it was brought to us, but we've already kind of discussed it a little bit. Currently, there is no formal approved plan in place for spending the money brought in by Measure E. Do you believe it is important to have an actual plan in place before the money comes in, or should the money come in and then the committee determine the actual plan? How are the allocations determined without an actual plan? Mr. Farrington.
Well, let me start with the allocations. The allocations are already determined if Measure E passes by our umbrella expenditure plan, which is part of the ordinance of Measure E. And that's where we set forth the allocation of 88% going to algae, lake weeds, preventing mussel infestation. We go to the 9% for water quality programs, compliance with TMDL requirements, NPDES requirements, and 2% for capital match projects, and 1% for annual auditing. So that's the master expenditure plan. The draft plan will be created as by design after the passage of Measure E. Right now, those plans that have been proffered by our staff, Mr. DeLeon to CLAC, I have not even looked at. Since he presented the first one for discussion purposes, he has created 2 more. One has a launch ramp control process and monies that are allocated to that. There's another draft plan that I have in here where most of the money is allocated to preventing the invasive species such as zebra quagga mussels. Then there's another plan that allocates more money towards algae abatement. And you're right, Mr. Murphy, I'm just one of 5. My vision is to address those issues that would be first and foremost and paramount to me are those where they pose a health and safety safety concern. I would guarantee you that Supervisor Rushing would also support me expending monies in the Keys if that was the desire of the Citizens Oversight Committee and the Board of Supervisors. There's 2 votes, so we're 1 away from actually looking at addressing that problem. The plan, as I indicated, needs to be created by the committee, both in terms of the elected officials that will act in a policy capacity, the citizens that will act in a policy capacity, the citizens also at large that will attend the meetings, which will be notified, even though Measure E requires an annual meeting. I foresee them, I'm qualified as an individual, one elected official, meeting on a more regular basis, especially in the beginning. That is how the plan will be recommended to our board, and then ultimately, you're right, it'll take three board members to decide how that plan will be implemented. But I want to reiterate, I've never been a rubber stamp for staff, and whatever our staff presents, we will give it great deference and weight, but ultimately it'll be the board as the lead agency that'll make that final decision.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy, you can answer the question if you like also, but we also have a little, one extra question for you. If there was a sensible plan in place for spending the money, would you support Measure E?
If I had full confidence that there were absolutely no other alternatives, in other words, there was no other economies that could be found in the county budget, well, like I've said before, this is important. It has to be done one way or another. I'm just opposed to how they proposed to collect this money. So I guess the answer would be yes, I would be in favor of it. I'd like to point out that the last time a sales tax measure was proposed in Lake County countywide, it was a road tax measure. And I was not opposed to a sales tax for the roads. It's the way that tax was structured that I opposed, and fortunately that measure was defeated.
Rebuttal, sir?
Well, I never supported any tax in my 12 years of service, and I never supported those road tax proposals, both within the city of Lakeport and countywide. I believe that it was just a Band-Aid, that there was no return on investment with road tax. In fact, our board was grappling with a lake tax versus a road tax, and at the beginning of that dialogue, there was about 4 board members that were pushing for the countywide road tax. I stood alone here advocating and being very passionate about us looking at the lake tax. I believe that the lake is, as the lake goes, so does our economy, and that with addressing these nuisances and preventing the infestation, which I think is one of the most important critical things that we can do, will pay us greater dividends than that of investment of a road tax. Unfortunately, if we're going to look at reallocation of our own county budget, we're going to have to cut services. We have a balanced budget. We're one of the few in the state of California, so you have to decide if you're going to cut libraries, if you're going to cut mental health services, if you're going to cut public safety, if you're going to cut staff at the jail, if you're going to cut animal control services. In order to make that reallocation, those are the decisions we're going to have to make, and our board is not prepared to cut those services to the people that need them.
Mr. Murphy?
Well, apparently the board isn't prepared to cut over $1 million of waste out of vector control either, because they've had an opportunity to do it.
Yeah, well, you can petition that.
In fact, the last 2 people, myself and Lowell Grant, who have left the board of directors of vector control, have both publicly recommended to the board that it go through the LAFCO process to take it out of the special district status, and the program be run out of the health department with private contractors doing the spraying. We're both convinced that it's going to save significant amount of money. I believe over $1 million a year forever. And so I would agree with Mr. Farrington that the county budget is very tight. I don't think there's a loose $1 million in it that we need to run the Quagga program. But that money is available. In fact, there's $2 million sitting in the account of vector control right now. They have another $1 million worth of assets they're not using. That money could go into the program today.
Thank you. Okay. A poll that has been running on Lake County Magazine is showing approximately 49% yes to 43% no on Measure E, with approximately 8% believing it does not matter as the county will do what they want to do anyway. The breakdown of the yes vote shows that 23% are unequivocally for it no matter what. 10% are for it as long as there is sufficient oversight of the money collected. and 10% agree if there is a sensible plan put in place. The no vote breaks down like this. 36% believe the county would not spend the money correctly, and 6.85% believe the plan just cannot work. What can you say today to improve the public opinions regarding Measure E, either for or against it?
I'm first.
You may go first.
Okay. The only poll that matters to me is November 6th and the election. That's the only poll I pay attention to. And, this Measure E is not about me. It's about we. It's never been about me. It's an opportunity for our voters to decide whether they want to be shareholders and chart the future for Clear Lake. If Mr. Murphy wants to bring me statutory authority or legal authority that shows that the mussels and algae is a defined vector, I'm welcome to look at that, and I would entertain exploring that in greater detail. I would also, since he has so much passion about vector control, do as I do as an elected official. Why don't you do a signature gathering and put a ballot measure before the voters, which is either advisory or mandates that we move forward with the dissolution process of vector control. Even if you're able to qualify the mussels as vectors, as I indicated, the money's not there in terms of what we need to do to put in, which is my vision, choke points to intercept transient vessels coming in and out of the county and abating lake weeds and algae. Getting to your question on the poll, the voters need to look at what's happened for decades. And what I hear as an elected official and growing up here is complaints about the lake. And this is a true opportunity for all of us, to put our money where our mouth is, to actually try to do something for the first time in the history of the county. The plan that will be developed is a plan that there will be significant input in, not only the Oversight Committee, but the City of Clear Lake, the City Council, the City of Lakeport, our Board of Supervisors, our staff. And will it be perfect? No, there is no perfect plan. There's no perfect local legislation. But it will be our best effort, and it's much better than the status quo of what we've done for decades, and that's doing nothing.
Mr. Murphy.
Actually, we've been doing a lot. We've been spending a lot of money. We spent around $1 million last year on weeds and algae. And I don't think people were impressed or satisfied with the results. So, again, I think people have to look at the track record of the way the county has spent money on these programs in the past and judge for themselves if they think that giving them basically a big $24 million check with really no meaningful oversight is a good idea. I don't know what the voters are going to think about this come Election Day. I think it'll be pretty close, just like the last road tax measure was. What really does concern me, and I think should concern Mr. Farrington as well, is that if this passes, there's going to be a very high expectation level among all taxpayers to see a noticeable, dramatic improvement in the water quality of the lake. And I'm not sure that that can be done, regardless of how much money we throw into that body of water. So if this did pass, I'm not sure I'd want to be on the Board of Supervisors, because there'd be a lot of pressure to deliver on some really significantly improved water quality, and I'm not sure that that can be done. Not given the amount of money and the size of the lake and all that. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. I am really concerned that so many people that are in favor of it don't seem to have any understanding of the practical realities involved, and they really do have that expectation level that the lake will be fixed if we spend this money.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure that can be guaranteed.
I just want to clear a statement that Mr. Murphy made that the board did not spend $1 million last year. We set aside $1 million over a 2-year period. So we spent half of that last year and the other half this year. So it was spread over 2 years, not 1 year. And I've been on the board now this is approaching my 12th year. And when we expended that first amount, that first half allocation, that $1 million last year, it was the first time in my years of service to the community where I received 0 complaints regarding lake weeds. 0. The only complaint that I did receive was from those people that lived in the Cove of Corinthian Bay where the harvester was too late. We were successful because harvesters were not allowed on the lake for a number of years because of hydrilla, since it was found and discovered in 1994 because of the risk of and concerns from the California Department of Food and Ag and the hydrilla program of fragmentation of the hydrilla as an invasive species or translocation. We were able to bring CDFA before us, and we were able to cooperate and do a pilot project by Rocky Point, and now use herbicide application, mechanical harvesters, and we've had tested, it's been tested and proven success where I've received no complaints. And it's true, there are some high expectations, just as you would with the roads, that all the roads are going to be paved in gold if the road tax passed, and that's not the case, and that's why I come out very candid saying Lake County and Clear Lake will never be a swimming pool, and we're not trying to make it Lake Tahoe. We're trying to bait the nuisances and protect it from an infestation of mussels, which will devastate us ecologically and economically.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy?
I don't really have a lot to add to that, really.
Okay, that'll be fine. I'm going to break the format and answer the question for you both. This debate itself, I think, is a good way to overcome people's apprehensions, be it good or bad, regarding this measure by the two of you participating tonight and having this aired on Channel 8 and having other mediums available so the public and the citizens of this county can actually hear more about Measure E than what they just read in the local media. So,
I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate Phil's request for this. I think it's an excellent opportunity.
it's good form. Okay, a few last questions here. And I'm not sure, Mr. Murphy, you're going to be able to answer these in the same manner as Mr. Farrington, so we're not trying to be unfair here, but these are questions that came in late that, since we have some extra time, I would like to address them. So,
All right.
okay. What has happened to the $38 million for the Middle Creek Restoration Project? What has happened to the additional $8 million to be used to clean up the lake? And what has happened to the $6.25 million for the purchased swampland when most of the lake polluting occurs at the south end of the lake?
Well, first of all, that number is not accurate. Let me actually read our staff report here on what we've acquired in terms of funding. In 2003, the district was awarded $5.214 million in a grant by the Department of Water Resources to begin acquiring residential properties within that project area. And of course, we're not exercising any eminent domain. It's only by willing sellers in terms of acquisition. In December of '06, that original grant of $5.214 million was increased to $5.714 million. As of November 2008, we had acquired 7 residential properties, but in '08, later on in December, those monies were frozen. It wasn't until this last year in April where we were approved for $7 million. So if you add that up, it's around $12 million. So where you're getting this $38 million figure, whoever is posing that question, it's inaccurate, it's not true. This next year we're slated, as indicated in previous comments, that we're looking at acquiring approximately 6 additional properties for the year 2013. And also just within the last few weeks, our board advanced almost $1 million, which we're going to be paid back out of that $7 million grant from 2011 to acquire 4 properties that were in escrow. So that puts us at about 11 residential parcels that we have acquired. We have a number more to go. After we acquire these remaining residential parcels, we have close to 1,390 acres to acquire. At the time when I was first elected, we thought this was going to be around a $25–30 million project. It is now upwards towards close to in excess of high 30s to high 40s in terms of total project cost. So I want to set the record straight that that question was not accurate.
Fair enough. Do you have a response to that, Mr. Murphy?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that the original timeline for this was to start construction. This was as of 2003, was to start construction in 2005 and be finished by 2008. And I think it's also important to bear in mind that the last time the project manager spoke at a Board of Supervisors meeting about the Middle Creek Restoration Project, he said that there had basically been a 5-year period of limbo due to the county having lost focus. That was a direct quote. Well, Mr. Farrington can use the excuse that the state tied up the money. To a degree, he's right, they did for a while, but not for that whole time period. and it still doesn't explain why this project that began well, actually a little before his first term, but was underway in his first term, has drug on so long and has gotten so terribly far behind schedule. I mean, we're not even close. I think we're $5 million short on buying property, and we have to get all that done before we can get the Army Corps of Engineers to start construction. So we're way, way off of the timeline. And that's another reason people should be taking everything the county is telling them as far as promises with Measure E with a big grain of salt, because this is another example of a very important project that is really key to the water quality of the lake, and we were promised something that we didn't get, and we should have an understanding of why that promise was not kept, and we need to have that understanding in order to move forward. And we don't have that clarity yet.
Well, I respect Mr. Speak's statement that we lost focus, but he's coming in years after we've embarked on this journey to restore these wetlands. He does not have the full picture at that time, in my opinion. And to say that this, Mr. Murphy wrote an editorial that construction was to be slated for completion in '08 is absolutely ridiculous. I have the schedule here. As I indicated before, it was not in 1994 this project was conceived with a feasibility study. In '97, the Army Corps of Engineers did their reconnaissance study. This project didn't receive its first funding until 2003. And it was right around the same time where we were doing and completing our EIR and our EIS in 2004. A second batch of funding didn't come into '06. And the reality is we did not have congressional approval until '07. So where you're getting this time frame of construction to be completed by '08 is absolutely untrue. The original time schedule had suggested that potentially it would be 2012, 2014, but the project schedule that I have right before me right now for completed construction is 2014, 2016, which means since the conception of this project, it's a 20-year lifetime in terms of completing this project. And you can't fault the board. The board has made this a #1 priority with our congressional state representatives every year. And now we are using the money to actually lobby and try to secure money in a time when there is no money.
Mr. Murphy, response?
I would like to refer Mr. Farrington to the August 22nd, 2003 edition of the Record B, where all this information is stated very clearly as far as what the timeline was for this project. And really, what happened to get this project off track, where they lost focus, was when Bob Locious, the former director of Water Resources, retired. Ever since then, that department has been dysfunctional. It is dysfunctional today. That is why the head of the Public Works Department is basically doing the job of the director of the Water Resources Department. It's another example of how the county does not have its ducks in a row, yet wants to have a lot of new money to work with, and they really need to clean house before they're just given more money to run amok with.
Thank you.
Makes us want to take over vector control.
Yeah.
Better than taking it out of my pocket.
Yeah, well, you're already
All
paying
right,
for
gentlemen,
it.
that's enough.
You're assessed every year
Okay,
with vector control.
next question, Mr. Murphy. To your knowledge, are there any written documents or other evidence to support the claim that Scotch Creek and Middle Creek are the provider of 70% of the nutrients in Clear Lake?
I'm just assuming that the experts know what they're talking about. I've seen some of the, I believe it's infrared satellite photographs that show exactly where the phosphorus or any particular nutrient, whether it's nitrogen or phosphorus or iron or any of the other elements, are coming into the lake. And just looking at the photographs that I've seen, I think it's pretty compelling that that is the primary source of nutrient loading. I don't know about other contaminants going into the lake. Obviously, mercury's coming in from the other end. Maybe pesticide runoff is coming from other places. Maybe erosion is coming from other places as well. But I think that is the primary source of the nutrient loading. And I think that we really have to put a little faith in the experts and agree with them that that is where we should focus our efforts on as far as reducing the nutrients that are feeding the weed and the algae problem.
Well, with this type of imagery that we're talking about, you can see this is Rodman Slough, and you can see a plume that is coming in there at Rodman Slough, which is that light blue color. That is what Mr. Murphy is referencing. And I do rely on our staff and also experts to where about 57% of the inflow into Clear Lake comes from Scotts Creek and Middle Creek and meets at this confluence and runs through Middle Creek into the lake here. About 71% of that nutrient loading, in particular phosphorus and nitrogen, 71% of phosphorus right there comes in through the Rodman Slough Middle Creek restoration area. That is why it is an important project, but it has always been a long-term project, and I don't know the article you're referring to with the record being 2003. I don't know if I was quoted in it. I don't know what board members or what staff. We all have different visions, maybe in terms of time frames. Some maybe be a little overly optimistic, but when I try to be as an elected official, I try to be very candid and straightforward, and my belief is that you under-promise and over-deliver. I'm not going to give a time frame that's not realistic. Since I've analyzed this project, since I've been on the board, I've known that this project would never be completed by 2008. It's never even been scheduled for that, and I've known that it's never going to be built by 2012 or 2014. And you're going to tell me to rely on the experts in our staff, but right now, I'm right about that, and the reality is this project's even right now scheduled to be completed by 2016. I don't even think it's going to be ready by then. The money's aren't going to be there. We need another $30 to $40 million. That money's not going to fall from the sky. You know, we've done a number of things to address the sediment loading with our grading ordinances that we put in place to deal with best management practices in agriculture, the phosphorus from fertilizers, detergents, stormwater runoff. Our board, just in my district alone, if you don't trust us with results, we prevented 1 million gallons of hydraulic overloading from the Northwest Treatment Facility in my district and tied that with the Basin 2000 project where we took that treated effluent and connected it to the Southeast Treatment Facility and took that up to the geysers to produce power. We received the Green Energy Award, plus we have the largest municipal solar arrays in the western United States. So our board has a track record of success, and I know if any board is going to be able to implement a program, it's going to be our board.
Well, the board has a track record of spending lots of money. As far as lake-related projects go, I think the results are somewhat questionable. It is encouraging to see that the overall trend of water clarity has been better in the lake over the last 15 to 20 years. In other words, the clarity of the lake overall has been better. The real problem is that in the summer months, it has been very bad in certain areas, particularly the bays and the marinas and the south end of the lake in particular. So that has kind of offset and kind of obscured the fact that overall the water clarity has been improving if you're looking at it on a, big picture. So from that standpoint, I think that there's hope there, but again, I think that we have to really fundamentally restructure the way our county government is working before we can really expect to make any progress. I think we have some good people in county government. I think that the head of public works is very capable, and I think that at times when he has made questionable decisions, it's been really the influence of the board that has affected that. In other words, he's trying to do what he thinks the board wants rather than what he, as a professional engineer, feels would be the most effective or a most efficient way to proceed. I think George Speak, who's in charge of the Middle Creek Restoration Project, is very competent too. But again, I think that if you have good people in these positions, they have to be given some leeway and some room to, show their expertise and have to do it outside of that political bubble that they've been operating in.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Due to time, that was going to be the last question. You each now have 3 minutes for a closing statement. Mr. Murphy, you may go first, sir.
Well, I think that right now it's a very difficult time to be asking the taxpayers to shoulder any more burden than is absolutely necessary. And I feel very strongly that if certain economies are made in our government, the money is available to take care of these needs that are truly important. And until these efficiencies have been made in government, I don't think it's really wise to just be handing them more money. And particularly in this case, where the people who primarily or who benefit the most from this are at this point not paying anything, and they're less likely to contribute if we do pass this, because there's no reason for them to. Right now, there's a lot of pressure on Yolo County. They have to be thinking very hard about the risk that they are taking of letting the quagga into Clear Lake, because it will impact them to a much greater degree than it will impact us economically. So they're kind of playing Russian roulette right now, and every day goes by, the pressure grows on them to, do their share on this. And if we pass Measure E, that pressure will be gone. So I think between the fact that we have another way to fund this, because that money is available in vector control, and that should be a problem addressed regardless, then we need to get everyone who's benefiting from this to pay their fair share, and that includes corporations like Cal Water and Lucerne, millions of dollars of infrastructure at risk there, yet they pay nothing, big out-of-county corporation. They have to pay their share. We have to have legitimate oversight of how that money's spent, and we need a plan, a real plan, not a 88% grab bag, which is what Measure E is. We have no idea what's in that 88% of it or what we'll get. We need a plan before we just hand them a lot of money. I'm not opposed to sales tax measures, but it has to meet those criteria before I would say that this is something that the voters and taxpayers should support. Because as it is, this is just flawed on every level. I think it was rushed to the ballot due to the time frame, and I think that we really need to go back to the drawing board. We have to fix all these systemic problems we have in the county government before we make any headway on any of these major problems dealing with the lake.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Well,
Farrington.
vector control is not an option. He keeps focusing on that, the focus of Measure E. It's pie in the sky until you show me the money and you show me that algae and the zebra mussels are a vector. I'm not going to believe it. It's simply untrue. There is no source of other money. This is it. Unless we look at parcel taxes or TOT taxes or benefit zones, boat launch facilities, and charging people fees at those facilities for launching their boat. We have had success. As I indicated, the last 2 years, we've treated 250 acres of weeds. It's the first time in my years of office, 0 complaints. We've had a number of trials, some successes and some failures with the algae. We know now what will work, and we have a vision for that. The committee can tailor that. That's the purpose of the committee and the citizens, to create that plan, not from the top down, from the bottom up, and that's done by design intentionally. The lake is getting clearer. Controlling and preventing that 1 million gallons of raw sewage, our grading ordinances, best management practices, controlling our total maximum daily loads. The lake is getting clearer, and this is where we do agree. And that's why we're seeing a greater inducing of growth with both algae and the lake weeds, is because the UV rays and the sunlight is penetrating on a very shallow, warm-bodied lake. We use a Secchi disc, and the data cannot lie that that disc is getting deeper and deeper every year in terms of its visibility to show and prove that the lake is getting clearer. You know, I go back to my childhood memories growing up on the lake. Remember fishing when crappie was abundant, bluegill. We could fish with hooks, with even out bait on the hooks and actually catch fish. I don't remember weeds being a problem like they are today. Algae was not problematic. It was saturated. It wasn't dense. It didn't have the noxious odor. We've received decades of complaints. and the insanity of doing the same thing over and over again without expecting a different result, but never having the money or having the audacity and the leadership to put something before the voters and let them decide. They're the shareholders. It affects everything. Their drinking water supplies. I have a system because of algae and weeds that they have to upgrade the system because they can't process that because of the algae and the weeds. It's air quality, it's real estate, it's job creation. And churn in terms of bringing second homeowners here. And I indicated before our forum, almost 80% of those people that are rim land owners are second homeowners. And in my chairing and being part of Save the Lake Committee, it's like a recording over and over again. Those folks fell in love with Lake County in the 40s and 50s. They're no longer coming up here. And their kids are no longer coming up here, and their grandchildren. And they're sitting on the property waiting to sell it. That's disposable income. That affects our public services, what we provide. We're losing tourism. We're losing them. We're not able to provide the public services because we don't have that disposable income spent in our economy. This is a make or break decision. The threat is imminent. San Benito, San Justo, the reservoir there is quarantined. It's less than 4 hours away in drive time, maybe 4.5 hours. That's the zebra mussels. Over 20 bodies are infested in Southern California. And it is possible within the near future. In fact, there's a Press Democrat article that came out this last May that says if lakes are infested, they will be shut down. What do you think that will do to our economy and our way of life here in the Clear Lake? So I ask people to give strong consideration to Measure E and chart our future. Unfortunately, we cannot rely on vector control, dissolution, state and federal government. The responsibility is going to lie with us.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That concludes the debate this evening. I would like to thank both of you gentlemen, Mr. Farrington, Mr. Murphy, for participating. I believe this was a great service to the community. We will have it aired on Channel 8 and our Lake County Magazine website. Thank you very much again, and thank you for those who attended.
Here's an article from 1932. It says,